Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bow Valley Sustainable Building Summit. My name is Jody Connuel, and I am a program coordinator at the Biosphere Institute of the Bow Valley, and has become customary, your host today. Before we get started, I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping notices. As webinar attendees, you will not be able to unmute your microphone without permission or turn on your video. However, we do welcome active participation at these events. So if you have any questions for Geoff, please do type them into the Q&A box, which is accessible using the bar along the bottom of your screen. He will try to answer the questions as they come in, but there will also be a little bit of additional time at the end for further conversation. If you experience any technical difficulties, please do reach out to me using the chat function, and I will do my best to assist you. So the Bow Valley Sustainable Building Summit has been brought to you today by the Biosphere Institute of the Bow Valley and the Bow Valley Builders and Developers Association. The Biosphere Institute is a local Canmore-based charity that aims to address what we believe are the two major challenges affecting the Bow Valley today, one of which is human-wildlife coexistence and the other is climate change. We run our climate change action programming through our SHIFT program. The SHIFT program promotes local action, empowering Bow Valley residents and businesses to reduce their energy emissions, waste production, and water use. The Bow Valley Builders and Developers Association is a membership-driven networking and advocacy group. BODA keeps its members up to date on issues impacting the industry and our community. BODA luncheons have become the premier monthly business networking event in the Bow Valley. With generous funding from Energy Efficiency Alberta and the town of Canmore, the Biosphere Institute spent 6 months in 2019 asking local businesses what they want to learn about energy efficiency and how they want to learn it. The result is the Bow Valley Sustainable Building Summit, and due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the decision was made to cancel the original in-person event and bring our webinars and learning online. So I'd now like to introduce today's presenter, Geoff Domenico. As the president of KCP Energy, Geoff has led well over 200 unique solar electric, solar thermal, and energy efficiency projects. KCP Energy has learned a lot about solar over their 12 years in the Alberta solar business. And in case you're curious, he does hold a degree in mechanical engineering from Queen's University and is a member of the APEGA. I'm going to ask him to clarify exactly what the acronym stands for. He's an active community participant, and we're really grateful that he took the time out of his busy schedule to come and talk to us today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to the man of the hour, Geoff Domenico.
There we go. Hi, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you, Geoff.
Awesome, thanks, Jody. Okay, now do I need to, how do I get the next slide up here?
So if you just go to the big green button and share your screen.
Yeah.
You should be able to remove my screen, my slide.
This one. Sorry, I thought I was going to just take right over. Okay, how are we doing there? We got that. Are we seeing a KCP slide with a globe here? I'm hoping, as well as all the sponsors in the bottom right corner. Good. All right. Okay. Well, thanks everybody. Really glad you could join, and I hope that by spending a bit of time listening to me talk a little bit about solar over the next 30 to 40 minutes, hopefully you get something positive out of it, learn something maybe that you didn't know before. So Jody did a great job of talking about the different sponsors for the program, and I'd actually kind of jotted them all in the bottom corner here because I was going to talk a little bit about them as well. I've been always very impressed with what the Biosphere has done. Had interactions with them for, I guess we're 13 years into this business now, for the entire time the KCP's been around. Town of Canmore has always been a great supporter. In fact, was a supporter of solar right at the very beginning of our business starting. And though I am currently not a member of BODA, certainly I would agree that during my time as a BODA member, very much enjoyed the networking meetings and learned a ton by participating in those on a monthly basis. Final thing is, I guess, Energy Efficiency Alberta They obviously provided some funding for Jody and the Biosphere to put this in the summit together. And I guess somewhat, depending on your perspective, somewhat of a sad day, because I think actually today is the very last day of Energy Efficiency Alberta. They cease to be. And in fact, I tried to text one of the guys in Energy Efficiency Alberta this morning just to say, hey, hope you're doing well and good luck, and got a bounce back. So apparently they may have already handed in their cell phones. Anyways, things are always changing, and I do know that some of the functions of Energy Efficiency Alberta have been handed off to Emission Reduction Alberta, and we hope to continue to see some great things out of that. So Jody, perhaps maybe at this point, I think we put together a little survey. Did you want to maybe ask the participants or put that up in front of the participants here right now, and we'll see what they say?
Sure thing. So we have just a few questions here. We'd just like to learn a little bit about who's on the line. So if you could take a moment just to answer the 3 questions on your screen, we would very much appreciate it. Oh, says polling is closed. 1 second, having a slight technical difficulty. There we go. So we're interested to know in what sector you work, what experience you have with solar, and why you might be considering solar as an option. And we're going to just leave this up for a minute or so, try and get some good feedback from everyone.
I don't think I get to vote, do I?
Actually, you can vote.
Oh, it's too late now.
Okay, we're just going to leave it up for a couple more seconds. Maybe 10. Doing great. Good contribution, guys. Thank you. Okay, so that's pretty much everyone. So we're going to end this, and I will share the results with everyone. You should be able to see the results on your screen now. It looks like we've got a few architects on the line and some superheroes, which we like to see. People with a reasonable amount of experience with solar, Geoff, you'll be glad to know. Only a couple of people without. And lots of people are interested because of the climate change mitigation aspect of solar.
Great. Okay. Awesome. Okay. Well, that's helpful. Not sure if that'll stay up on. Oh, it won't disappear, but that's okay. Excellent. Okay. Well, that's good. I thought perhaps, Jody, it might be just you and I on here, but it does look like some other people are there. So that's great. Let's get rolling. So I'm going to, I've just sort of quickly outlined the things I wanted to try to touch on today, and I'm going to try to be cognizant of timing, and I am going to try to watch for questions as we go, as Jody mentioned. Very quick intro to KCP. But I want to try and start off by talking a little bit about what I see happening with solar, and I mean across the globe, not just in Alberta, not just even in North America. And then I'll try and zoom it in a little bit as to what I see happening within Alberta. I'm going to talk a little. I'm always like to try to talk about electricity costs and billing, because in spite of the fact that people want to talk about climate mitigation, it always seems that the conversation starts there and then seems to focus in that direction. And what we really want to do is we want to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. We want to come up with a viable economic solution, and we want to come up with climate mitigation. We want to do them both. I'm going to try and talk about solar as part of the sustainable building our home, and maybe more specifically some of the challenges around electrification. And I'll try to jump a little bit into the grid there and talk about that too, because that's a real big piece in Alberta, and it's gets interesting, I think. Or at least I find it interesting. And then finally, quickly into batteries and EVs. We'll see how we're doing for time here. And we'll sort of go, and hopefully at the end here, have time for questions and answers. All right, a little bit about us. KCP Energy was established in 2007. We're a full service solar EPC, so we do engineering, procure, and construct. We have our APEGA permit to practice. That's the Alberta Professional Engineering and Geologists Association. That's which I think was what Jody was asking a little bit earlier there. You know, KCP has experience in project delivery, but also we now have experience with power purchase agreements and project divestitures. We're really interested in finding ways to partner with our customers. We don't like the one and done model. We like to create a long-term relationship that's beneficial for us, but also more importantly, beneficial repeatedly for our customers. I think we'd call ourselves large rooftop design and install specialists. We serve commercial, agri, education, municipal government, and we have a core certification, which is pretty much, I'd say, the gold standard for safety within the province. I guess the final two things I just quickly point out is, we're really honored to have a lot of really strong, extremely strong professional partners within the industry who have chosen to work with us. We feel blessed for that, and we also take pride in the fact that they've chosen to work in KCP. And I really truly believe this, that the biggest piece that makes KCP what it is our team, and it's the strength of our team. Okay, enough about KCP. Let's talk about what's happening in solar anyway. So, and when I say that, what do I mean? I mean, well, what's going on in the world? And the truth of the matter is, solar's gone mainstream. No doubt about it. It's here. It's not everywhere. It's not here, as it were, but certainly there's a lot of stuff that's happening. So what do I mean by that? Well, United States last year surpassed 2 million solar installations, okay? And they're on track to get to 3 million next year. What does that mean? That means they're putting in a solar system about every 2 minutes. That's a big number, isn't it? Okay, that's fine. That's pretty substantial. Well, what else is going on? Well, we just saw some news come out. Forbes and others were reporting in the first half of 2020, 40% of the electricity used by the EU 27, so the EU countries, was generated by renewables. Compare that to 32%, which was fossil fuel based. So that's the first time that's ever happened. And we always talk a lot about how do we do this? Can it work? Do we have intermittency issues, et cetera, et cetera? Well, it turns out that we're starting to find solutions, or we can see solutions in other areas where this is happening. I'll give you a bit of context on what those numbers look like. If we're looking in the States, I'm just checking my notes here. They were 18% renewables, and they're about 62% fossil fuel. So in spite of some of those giant numbers in the first bullet I'm talking about, you can see that actually, relatively speaking, they still have a lot to do. To keep going on the EU countries for a moment, the other really interesting point that I think people were jumping up and down on and really wanted to highlight is it turned out that the countries that had the highest renewable generation actually ended up with the lowest electricity prices. Once again, something that I think people are still trying to wrap their heads around here in North America, but what we're actually seeing is this is the way it's playing out. Final thing I'll talk about or point out here as far as what's going on, and this actually isn't specific to solar, but they always go hand in hand, is the incredible numbers we're seeing on the residential storage side in the US. So 48.7 megawatts of residential batteries went in Q2 in 3 months, 12 weeks. What does that mean? That's like 5,000 power walls if you're trying to figure it out. So there is a lot of stuff happening across the globe in the areas of solar, renewables in general, and in storage. So, okay, great. What's happening here in Alberta, of course, because that's where we all live. Well, at the utility scale side, and I can put a little bit of a caveat in here. I don't have an exact number, but sort of looking at what I see out there, I think we have currently about 1 gigawatt of solar either in the development pipeline, either being put in the ground, or either in permitting stage happening across the province. You go down to the south of the province now, there is solar going up everywhere on the utility scale side. And it's really substantial, and I think we're going to start to see it actually show up in our generation blend across the province. Just to give you a little bit of an idea, I took a look last night on the ASO live site generation site, and basically what that does, it tells you at any point in time where all the energy is coming from that's being generated within the province. It looked to me like it was somewhere around 10% was being generated by wind, biomass, renewables. There's another bucket in there to maybe a couple other sources. Point is, there's actually a bit happening here as well, in spite of the fact that maybe we don't think that. So that's the utility scale side. The other side of the picture is, well, what's happening with on-site generation, which is frankly the piece that KCP participates in more, and probably the area that the vast majority of the people on the call are interested in. So the acronym that we start to hear now is BTM, or behind the meter. And that would include microgeneration or on-site generation, basically production that's happening behind the meter, not at the utility side, but at the building side. So to give you a little bit of context there, when Energy Efficiency Alberta was running their program, they peaked out at about 1,200 systems installed in a year. So once again, going back to some of the numbers I used with our southern neighbors earlier, if we were to try to get ourselves installing at the same pace as what's happening in the US, we would need to take that 1,200 number and increase it by 6 to 10 times. So point, I guess, is that frankly, there's really not a lot happening here yet, even though I think Alberta has been picked as sort of the next market within Canada for sure that's going to go off. So what does that mean? Well, I guess the good news to me means, you know, installing in solar in Alberta helps you save money, and you don't have to worry about being first. Everyone else is doing it. We're just not there yet. Okay. All right. So we talked a little. All right. Hopefully, you guys got a little bit of a better picture of what's happening in the solar world, I guess, literally, and then as well in Alberta. I want to talk a little bit more, dive down a little bit more into sort of solar overview very quickly, because I think most people will know this. Talk a little bit about microgen, and then talk about what I think are sort of the key solar value props for creation or for solar value in Alberta. Okay, so solar basics grid-tied system, and this is courtesy of one of our team members here, this slide. So I'm going to give Lee credit for that. Thank you, Lee. Basically, we have solar panels sitting on the roof, which converts sun to direct current. This DC from the panels, the direct current from the panels goes to the inverter. The inverter converts the DC to AC and matches the grid frequency and such to what's actually happening in the building. Typically, there'll be some sort of monitoring application, so you can go online and you can see what's happening, see how much you're producing and such. And then the inverter actually is your interconnection point into the building. Okay, and it gets done all kinds of different ways, but in a residential home, for example, it's as simple as connecting your inverter to a spare breaker in your electricity panel. Okay, things such as battery storage, EV chargers, backup generators, all of these pieces can be tied in as well. And the key piece, at least in the microgeneration side of things, which is an Alberta specific piece of legislation, is a bidirectional meter, which measures or continues to measure the electricity going into the building, but it also measures the electricity going out. And maybe that's a key lead into the Alberta microgeneration regulation as a whole. So this regulation went in 2007, and there was a program called Lasso the Sun, which was a municipal program. They picked 10 municipalities and they put in 1 kilowatt systems in all of them. And Canmore put one in on the senior center building. So when you go and you look up at the cedar shaped roof there, it's also where it's not a child care, but like sort of the community center is there, as well as the senior center. You'll see a 1 kilowatt system in there. That was part of the Lasso the Sun program. And the beautiful thing that came out of Lasso the Sun, in my opinion, probably the most important thing, was it kickstarted revisiting or creating legislation that turned into the Alberta microgeneration. When we actually did the application for the Canmore building, we were running through a process that apparently was quite comparable to what you would have done for a coal generating station. And yet here we are, and we're trying to put a little 1 kilowatt system on the roof. So fast forward, out of that, we now have a piece of legislation, a document that is well understood, easily executed, I would say, and provides an opportunity for a broad range of behind the meter generation solutions within the province. I think it's a real success. And you know, if I was to, I'll do a call out here to Gordon Howell, who is probably the gent who's been in the solar business the longest here in Alberta. He was the driver for that piece. And I think, you know, we've all benefited in the industry from that, as have the homeowners who put solar on and the larger building owners. Okay. We talked a little, so continuing on with microgen. So what's the essence of the microgen agreement? I'm not going to go through it line by line. The essence is Mr. and Mrs. solar owner on their home, building, otherwise, decides that they want to put a system in place. And then the legislation basically says, utility, thou shalt put in a bidirectional meter and you shall accept the excess generation that goes out to the grid. But the system that's put in cannot produce more electricity over the course of the year than what actually gets used by the building. Can't be a net generator. Okay, you can get to zero, you can't be a net generator. And then the last piece is, well, if you do produce excess electricity that doesn't get used in the building. That goes back to the grid and you get compensated for that at the retail rate. And I'll just point out, I guess, that the system sizes that can fit under the Alberta microgeneration regulation are from, I guess, 0 kilowatts all the way up to 5 megawatts. And if you're trying to figure that out, if you don't use these numbers every day, 5 megawatts, that's 5,000 kilowatts. And 5,000 kilowatts compared to a typical resi install, residential home install, probably 7 kilowatts, 5 kilowatts. So big systems. The one we're looking at here on the roof, there's actually a solar thermal in the left corner there on the raised piece. Lower piece is a part of about a 337 kilowatt system. So it gives you an idea. That's a small piece relative to 5 megawatts if you think about it. Okay. All right. The last piece, I think, sort of when I'm running through the solar in Alberta, or sorry, in sort of the solar overview piece, I guess, is, well, what is actually driving interest in solar here in Alberta, and specifically at the commercial level? And what we're seeing, and I think we just spent a few minutes on it, is that the microgeneration regulation enables site-based generation. Of all the things that you're trying to battle through when you're trying to get a project together, if you think about permitting challenges, you think about all those other pieces, what we don't need is another piece that's a roadblock or complex for us to be able to jump through the hoops and make things happen. And I can say behind the meter solar on an existing building, first of all, the permitting approach is typically very reasonable. And second of all, the microgen regulation, because it's so well established, and I would say reasonably fair for all parties, I think these are really big pieces that are enable the generation here in the province, microgeneration. Okay. Now, of course, when you're trying to figure out why solar works well in Alberta, you better consider solar generation, and that would be things such as your location, what the angle of your system is, the amount of space, shading, orientation. But I think what's beautiful about Alberta is we have a great solar resource. Once again, one of the reasons why we see so much utility scale stuff going off in the bottom of the province. What does this all mean when you take your strong production and a upfront CapEx that's low and competitive, which we definitely see here in Alberta, you end up with a competitive levelized cost of electricity. So what does that mean? That means when we looked at the cost of the electricity the solar is generating and we rub it up against utility electricity in the microgen scenarios, so the behind the meter scenarios, we end up with actually quite attractive IRR, rate of return, somewhere in high single digits and perhaps even over that. Put aside the economics, you have a hedge against unpredictable future electricity rates. There happens to be an accelerated capital cost allowance for tax scenarios, depending what your company looks like. There's even a potential carbon offset rev stream that's unique to Alberta because of the tier program. And finally, if you're a corporate customer, if you aren't already, at some point here, you're going to start getting hammered on ESG. So that's environment, social, and governance. We hear it all day long now when you're listening to it. We're actually starting to see some of the big funds insist on it. And frankly, to me, it's something you want to get in front of so that you're not sitting in at some point in the time with your business trying to understand why you can't get access to funding in that because somebody's put some ESG criteria against you that you weren't aware were going to be happening. ESG can of course drive local KPIs or internal KPIs, key performance indicators. Okay. All right, so that's what have we covered off here? We sort of talked about the value prop of solar in Alberta, how solar works, how our microgen agreement works. We talked a little bit about what's going on in the world. Let's try and talk a little bit more about electricity cost. I'm just trying to be cognizant of time. I think we're okay. Jody, let me know if I need to speed up or otherwise here, but I'll keep going.
Thing. Thanks. Geoff, we actually have a question from Daniel, if you want to just take a moment to answer that.
Sure. I actually don't see it though.
I can read it to you. So he says, when you mentioned the uptake in residential energy storage, do you know where the majority of the uptake is? Is it Texas, California, New York, for example? And what is the price of electricity and distribution in these places compared to Alberta?
Okay, so I'll have to wave my hands a little bit on the numbers here, guys, but certainly California is one of the major markets, and it's a combination of being able to store your kilowatt hours to take advantage of time of use rates, which change over the course of the day, in combination with resiliency. So we had PPG, right? So the California utility, when we had, not this year, but last year or 2 years ago, they actually had to declare bankruptcy because they ended up in a scenario where there was a bunch, they suffered such losses from the wildfires and such that year, and they were identified as one of the reasons these happened, that they had to rejig their whole model. So they did two things, I guess. First of all, they restructured, of course, but that was sort of secondary. But they actually took on a strategy or an active management strategy where at certain times they would look at putting in place localized blackouts to de-risk fires and such. So what that might mean is if you're in certain jurisdictions, you could end up with an outage, an unplanned outage, and you had no power. So that's the resiliency component. And what you actually have been seeing, or what I read, is that in California, people will be making the choice to go with storage so that they can actually take advantage of, or rather be able to maintain power during these planned outages or unplanned outages for fire hazards. Okay, so that's the first thing, resiliency piece. On the retail cost side, the last numbers that I recollect seeing coming out of California, and whenever I see them, I just wish that we had them all day long for my business, but not for my own electricity bill, just to be clear, is somewhere around 25 cents a kilowatt hour. And I do not have how that parses between the distribution side of thing and the core energy piece. Certainly most provinces, for example, here don't even parse the cost up that way. They just have one lump number, and that's probably almost not a bad lead in into the next couple slides. So hopefully that gave you a little bit of context on storage, where it's happening, and electricity costs, and I guess why storage. Okay. All right, so I've had a bill up here on the screen for a couple of minutes, and I just wanted to sort of keep going down the path of how the credits get applied on the bill when you have excess generation. So down at the bottom of the screen here, I've got a box saying that we have solar microgen credit of $156.64. And you can see there's actually 3 line items there. And it turns out in this example, somebody has a combined electricity and nat gas bill. And I must admit, when I first saw this, I was a little bit surprised. I didn't think they would do this. I assumed that microgen credit would only be applied against the electricity portion of the bill. It turned out they actually applied it to both the electricity and the nat gas. So these credits pretty much wiped out, well, they definitely wiped out with a surplus the electricity bill because the homeowner had that much generation, but they also wiped out the majority of the nat gas bill. And after all was said and done, including GST and such, ended up with a $17 bill covering everything off. Okay, so that's, I guess, what's the point of this slide? It's kind of interesting. We see credits working, but I guess the other piece is it's quite well laid out now, I would say, regardless of who your electricity retailer is, as to how the microgen credits get passed back through. And you should be able to see this or something similar on your own respective bill when you have solar. And if you don't, that's the time to reach out to the company perhaps that installed the product, talk to them, see if they can help you, or work into the utility themselves. Okay. All right. So then the reason I thought the last question was kind of applicable to the next 2 slides is maybe more this one. And this is a slide that talks about the makeup of electricity costs in the province of Alberta. Okay. So I'm going to start, I don't think my cursor shows up here. I'm going to start on the left-hand side here, and I'm going to start from the bottom. So the energy charge is about 6 to 8 cents, let's call it, and that varies a bit, per kilowatt hour in the province for a residential customer, okay? And this is the piece that we all get focused on when we're trying to find the best bang for the buck on the retail side for electricity. And it's actually the only piece we can focus on and actually influence by making a choice for a retailer, because the balance of it turns out to be regulated. So this bottom chunk is deregulated. Within the province, it means retailers can come up with creative ways to reduce the cost of electricity for customers. It means the utility, the large scale generators are competing to provide this electricity, which gets resold and so on, okay? That's the one part. If we move up on the left-hand side, you'll see transmission and distribution, rate riders, local access fee, and you'll see that's kind of broken into 2 blocks. The first block is, we'll call it transmission distribution, and it's a variable portion. The second part, the very top, is fixed. You can't do anything about it. You could use 0 kilowatt hours in a month, you're going to pay that fee. It turns out though, the variable portion that's there, the 5.5 to 10 cents, once again varies. And this is part of the regulated part of your bill. So it is only impacted by, depending which utility or wire provider you work within. It can be avoided if you use a kilowatt hour off of your roof in your house, because you avoided then not only the 6 to 8 cent energy charge, but the 5.5 to 10 cent variable T&D. Okay. Now, when you ship, let's say you've met your solar system's provided all the production for your house, there's nothing left, or your building, and it's still producing more than that electricity flows out through the bidirectional meter, and then you actually get only the energy charge portion back, the retail portion back. So what's the point of this slide? I guess the point is solar is competing not necessarily only against the energy charge portion, but also against the variable T&D piece. And maybe I'll bring one more point up here too, and that is rate classes determine what the top half of this picture looks like. Okay, and what I mean by that is, well, where do I go with it? Maybe as far as I'll go with this for the moment is, what it might mean is you could theoretically have two buildings side by side, and depending on what rate class they've been assigned, which would be based roughly on how much electricity they use, the exact same solar system could theoretically make sense on one building and not the other. Point being, that's how much economically of a difference you can see depending on what the rate class looks like. Okay, all right. Next slide here, continuing down the price path. This is only looking at transmission charges for residential customers, so only the regulated portion. And you can see that over from 2004 up to 2018, that's a pretty straight line, frankly. Obviously, there's some dips and valleys. These are costs that are a part of the regulated market. And what I mean by that is that's the top half of the bill that or the top half of the bar graph, I guess we were just looking at. We cannot affect them. The only way we could affect them, I guess, is by physically moving from one territory into the next and finding a territory that had a lower rate. This is regulated. We have nothing to do with it, no control over it. We can only control that bottom energy charge, and then where we live determines the balance of it. Okay. All right. Where am I at here? Yeah, okay. I think we're probably not too bad. I'm going to keep going if I can here. And I want to try and take the conversation now. I sort of jumped into some billing details and electricity costs. I want to try and talk about how I think solar can help Alberta with sustainable homes or buildings for that matter. Now, I'm going to focus the conversation mainly around homes and residences. But before that, I'm going to talk a little more in general terms around the Alberta grid. Okay. So lots of a picture and a table on this slide. So what is, I guess what I want to try to talk about here is, I guess, what I've called in the slide or in the title of the slide, the Alberta electricity conundrum, and with respect to emissions specifically. So the signpost we have here identifies a whole bunch of different energy sources, and in the background looks like we obviously have some wind capability and we have some solar. Now, I could not find a sign that didn't have nuclear and such on it. And frankly, I didn't look too hard. But we obviously know currently we don't have any nuclear in the province, right? And I would say we have virtually no oil generation that I'm aware of. And probably not, we might have a pilot program, deep geothermal type generation, but that would sort of be out. So the remainder of the elements on that sign are really where the majority of the electricity comes from. And so I was talking earlier about the fact that the Alberta electricity market is deregulated, and it starts here with these different generation sources. And what actually happens is they are competing to have the right to generate electricity for us to use. And then of course it gets distributed across the province. So what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean by that is perhaps wind is in a good condition, a good position in that day, and they want to ensure that their production gets used. They're going to bid into the market at a competitive price. Now, at another time, coal may actually be in a position where it can be more competitive. It bids in at a price, and then you shift over this way. Now, what really happens in the real world is you never have 100% of one of these generation sources producing all the power. At least I don't believe so. you know, what you might see most likely would you see coal, nat gas, you'd see a bit of hydro, you'd see solar, though it's buried right now in the other column because it's really not big enough yet, and we certainly would see wind. And that's what this snip of this table I have at the bottom of the screen is representing. So this is the ASO live site, or a snip rather, of the ASO live site electricity generation and sort of what's happening currently. Now, I happen to not be able to see the most part, the furthest right column of this slide, just because of the way things are looking on my screen. But if we start at the left, this is the generation segment. The MC column represents the maximum amount of capacity available in that area. So coal can do 5,000 megawatts. And then the next one over, how do I do this quickly? Let me see if I can do this. Bear with me, guys. Just got to get a different version up in front of me. There we go. The next column over, TNG, that's the current amount that's being used. And I'll just read the numbers off another screen here. So for example, of the 5,000 megawatts of capacity, when I snip this, and this is always changing, 3,000 of that capacity, 3,000 megawatts is actually being used at that moment, and so on down the line. So you can see here, for example, wind, if you take wind, hydro, and other and added those up, you'd see that they're actually representing, let's call it 1/9 roughly of the total required generation at that point in time when I took this last night. Okay, so what, Geoff? Why is this interesting, or how is it relevant to a sustainable home? And so bear with me, I'm going to try and draw the lines here and connect the dots. So first of all, I think it really raises, or you can hopefully, by going through this explanation, it makes it a little bit clearer to think about how difficult it is to answer how clean the Alberta grid is, because frankly, we know it's always changing, right? So we end up taking averages. And really, you know, I guess what we do know is that the Alberta grid is probably going to have higher emissions than, for example, the BC grid, where the majority of it is hydro, and possibly be dirtier than other grids within other provinces. But the fact of the matter is, if you're trying to understand and you truly want to try to get to a net zero home or building, you probably should be trying to think about the generation sources and how dirty they are, okay? I guess it's the end-to-end energy chain and what that actually looks like. The second piece is which emission metric are you going to use? And because sadly, it appears these days that the provincial governments have a hard time getting along or agreeing on anything, with the federal government, what you'll actually see is they use different metrics. So for site generated energy, or renewable energy rather, currently the metric is 0.57 tons per megawatt hour generated. And that changes whether, so for example, that 0.57 number within the Alberta numbers doesn't get used for utility wind, doesn't get used for utility solar. It's actually lower. They don't give as much credit because of transmission losses, et cetera, et cetera. What's my point? My point is there's the Alberta chunk or list of different emission metrics. And then lo and behold, the feds within climate change, their climate change group actually have a national inventory number that they use. And it turns out it's 0.8. And it turns out there may be reasons, depending on what you're trying to compare yourself to consider one metric versus the other. The other thing to consider is, okay, great. So Geoff, you said there's a bunch of solar going in. What the heck does that mean at the utility scale side of things? Does that affect anything? And I guess the answer would be potentially yes, right? As renewables become more dominant, let's hope they continue that way. I think they truly will at the utility scale level, and probably faster than we anticipate. We're going to see more and more energy being produced with renewables. What does that mean? That means that the grid as a whole has a lower emission intensity, and hence this number changes, and we got to sort of revisit it over and over. Success, I guess, would be to have as low emission intensity within the metric as possible. The other things to consider is pricing, at least at the generation level, changes over the course of the day. What time do you need that electricity? And as I think I pointed out already, well, actually I didn't. And then the other piece is generation mix can actually start affecting electricity prices at the main grid level, which is kind of interesting, right? Super windy day, and the overall price of electricity in Alberta drops, wow, super sunny day, is that going to happen with solar? What does that look like? Like it's quite interesting. And then finally, because there's so many uncertainties, I guess my point I would put here at the end of this slide is, if you want to really understand what's happening and how you're impacting your own sustainable building solution, the opportunity is to try to look at site-generated renewables, because at least you got some control. All these other dynamics that are happening at the grid level, they're not yours. You're looking at what you can produce, and you can match that up against the footprint that you have. Okay, hopefully I connected some dots there. So that's one of the electricity conundrums. There we go. But there's another one too. And this one, I think, this is actually a really old pie chart, because KCP used to do a bunch of energy efficiency stuff. We used to do high efficiency heating products, etc. But for today's discussion, I grabbed it out because I think it really does a good job of highlighting the other challenge that we have with electrification and with sustainability in the home. And it turns out full home electrification is a real challenge. And so what you see here is you see two areas of blue, which is appliances and lighting, and there'll be some other things there. And I've seen, this one says 11%, I've seen 11 to 18% of the total energy used in the home is electricity, okay? So today when a solar person comes to your home and says, hey, I can offset all of your electricity and make you net zero, they mean net zero electricity. And they just mean this blue part of this pie chart. Well, take a look at the other energy demand areas within a home, and they're big. Look at water heating, it's over a quarter. Just hot water is typically over a quarter of the heating, or energy rather, used in the home. And then of course, space heating. So we know how to put solar on a roof to pretty easily tackle the electricity portion, right? We do that all day long. The real challenge is trying to come up with an electrification solution that tackles the water heating and the space heating. And it turns out it's a bit of a challenge. The final point I guess I pull out of here is, well, okay, Geoff, I get it. That's the part we're gonna have to focus on. And I'll try to talk a little bit more about that. Is it turns out when we actually convert nat gas to electricity, we end up with we quickly realize the difference in price between these two energy sources. Electricity is really expensive. So, 12 cents a kilowatt hour-ish. Okay, maybe it's only 10, I don't know. Compared to 2 cents, 3 cents, 4 cents for nat gas, it's crazy, right? So can you imagine, just on a cost perspective, if that entire pie as it is right now was being, I guess, energized, is that what I'd say, at 12 cents a kilowatt hour, how much more expensive your bills would be at your home? It's a challenge. It's not insurmountable, but it is the challenge, I think, when you're trying to take and understand how to electrify the home. If we look at our electricity bills, last thing I guess I'd sort of say about this would be, I would say typically a nat gas bill is pretty close in total dollar amount to electricity, isn't it? Okay, so then continuing on the full home electrification piece, I would say that it's relatively doable and even affordable to do a full electrified net zero home. And this is some example of some projects we did in Calgary for Mattamy Homes and net zero. Unfortunately, this area happens to be in the Big Hill area right now that happened earlier in the year. But that aside, electrifying a net zero home where the building envelope has been really, really focused on to minimize the amount of space heating demand and the water heating demand, which I guess is envelope based, but trying to maximize the efficiencies there, it's doable. The real challenge, or a real challenge when you do your existing home, is getting enough solar to actually be able to do this. And really it comes down to how good was the building envelope, what can you do to actually fix it? And then of course, there's also potentially issues on the home service size and codes. Okay. So Jody, we're at, do you want me to go for 5 more minutes maybe here? I think I could be done, or do you want me to stop? I think you'd said to shoot for 45. Are we okay to keep going a little bit longer?
Yes, please keep going. If you've got about 5 minutes left, that'll be absolutely fine.
Awesome. Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So the last two things I was hoping to chat about quickly, or sort of talk about quickly, are residential battery storage, the pros, the cons, challenges, and maybe a quick little touch on EV, and then I'll try to wrap up. Okay, so residential battery storage. What we're looking at here are 2 Tesla Powerwalls. Flashback to the number I shared earlier, 5,000 Powerwalls in 12 weeks. Maybe they're not all Powerwalls, but you get the idea, right? They're Sonins, they're LG Chems, they're maybe they're Iguanas from our Calgary-based company. Hopefully they're getting some of the action, and they're Tesla, right? Adding a battery to your solar system is pretty easily done. And I've mentioned, I think I just mentioned all the players, and I did mention Iguana, though I don't have them in there. I'm gonna fix that. And what we're starting to see is the solar companies, the inverter solar companies, so the ones that are producing the device that converts direct current from the roof to alternating current and ties it into the house, they're starting to come up with their own battery solutions too. And we're going to keep seeing this evolve. It's kind of interesting. SolarEdge is doing some stuff now. SMA, I think there's quite a few of them. Fronius and SMA, I think, are doing stuff. So we're starting to see this consolidation of the battery markets. Everyone's understanding that this is the next jump or the next step in the residential market. But what we're actually seeing right now, for sure, and we clearly tell people this, is the economics may work in other jurisdictions where there's time of use or where you have very expensive electricity, but they don't work in Alberta right now. We don't have time of use, and we don't have expensive enough electricity, frankly, which is a funny thing maybe to say, but it's a fact. It's actually, just to go off on a tangent for a moment, I think it's part of the reason that the Alberta solar industry is so competitive on our pricing, is that we have a really, we don't compete against each other, I don't think, as much as we compete against the alternates, which is utility electricity, and it's very competitive, and it's really driven us to have to be competitive too, to make our numbers work. So all that to say, batteries in Alberta are really mainly about resiliency. And then I guess the other final point I'd talk about here is capacity. Battery capacity is still pretty low relative to average home usage. So if we say that an average home Alberta uses about 27 kilowatt hours a day, which is a number I've seen, 2 Powerwalls will do about 26 kilowatt hours. You need at least 2 of them to sort of get into the realm of a day. Now, not sure if you can flash back. Can I do this or not? Sure. And that, by the way, was only to cover off the electricity portion with the battery, right? The 27 kilowatt hours would be roughly that blue chunk. And I'm not talking about trying to be able to have battery storage for all the rest of it. So really what you end up doing with batteries, I would suggest as well, is typically you'll pick some critical loads and you'll focus on those. Some of the challenges, I think I said it's simple to tie it into solar, but it can become quite complicated if you're trying to tie it in as an overall system. Often the house service size can be a bit of a challenge. I talked about 2 batteries, so there's quite a bit of CapEx to get involved in that. 2 batteries, super rough numbers. So we did, so KCP installed the first Tesla Powerwall in Alberta way long ago, and pricing really hasn't changed. And I would say 2 Powerwalls, you got to be looking at 25-ish K, right? It's quite a bit. There you go, fairly expensive solution, my next point. And then what you'll still find is some of the loads in the home may be too much to work on a battery power, because you're limited by the inverters typically that are mounted within the batteries. So if you've got 7,000 watts, there may be certain loads such as AC or something that you can't actually make happen. All right. That said, super cool product, definitely giving you resiliency and going to become more competitive over time. But I'm just, I think at this stage in our market, it's not as viable as it is in other markets. All right. The last thing, I think this is my last slide pretty much, that I wanted to touch on was the, just quickly on the EV side. And I think this is probably fairly well known now, but I'll throw it out there just in case, because it kind of fits into the sustainable home piece, because the vehicle, I think in my opinion, is something that should be considered when you're looking at the home as a whole or the building as a whole, because ultimately there's an energy component there too. And just looking at some numbers quickly, a solar system, a relatively small solar system of around 4 kilowatts, probably can get awful close to covering off an annual energy requirement for an electric vehicle. Okay. And 4 kilowatts, what does that mean, Geoff? Just in case, I think I threw some numbers out. I've probably thrown a lot of numbers out, but one of the numbers I mentioned earlier is, average residential systems now are in that 7-ish kilowatt range. So 4 kilowatts for your EV, 7 kilowatts to get your electricity portion of your home to net zero, assuming you're not trying to cover everything. It's an 11 kilowatt system. Often there's not enough roof space in a residential home for that much, but there might be. And in which case you could potentially tackle all the electricity of the home and the EV of the home with a grid-tied system. Okay. All right. I think that is all I had. I guess, Jody, so basically, I guess just to sum up, thank you everybody for listening. I hope you don't sit here after spending 50 minutes with me thinking, wow, that was a waste of time. I hope you got 1 or 2 useful snippets out of it. And, maybe I'll stop there and I'll ask for Jody to take over, and maybe we can see if there's any questions.
Thanks, Geoff. We do have a couple of questions popping in. I'm happy to read them to you. If anyone does have any other questions, we do have a few minutes, so please feel free to type your questions into the chat. So we have a couple of questions here from Ursula. She has a question regarding the actual carbon footprint and the environmental impact of solar systems. Firstly, what is the carbon footprint of producing the solar system, materials, energy required, etc.?
So I think, I don't know is the first part I think I would say. And what I mean by that is I don't like to throw a number out there unless I feel very comfortable that I know what the number exactly is. Okay, so that's the first piece. What I have seen and haven't had a chance, I guess, to research this to the level that would make me very comfortable in sharing a number, is I've seen numbers that say, after a few months of production on a current modern solar module, you will have generated as much energy as what was used in the process for producing that module. Okay. I can tell you when I first started, we talk about 2 years type thing or more, or 3 years. But what's happening with solar is it's becoming a commodity. The modules are becoming commodities, and the focus and creative manufacturing development that's going into squeezing the last little bit of efficiency, and hence every time you increase efficiency or reduce cost of that manufacturing product or solution, you naturally reduce the energy requirement. That's just a natural path. There has been a continual, I would say, reduction in the amount of I guess what would you call it, embodied energy in a module. And I think we'll continue to see that moving forward. I also, by the way, don't know the embodied energy of a coal plant or a nuclear plant and so forth. So there's a few things I don't know that I would say is probably a very great question to be asking the other energy sources out there too. Hopefully that helps a bit.
Thank you, Geoff. And what is the solar system lifespan nowadays?
Okay, great question. So it really sort of breaks into 2 portions. So the first portion is what is the manufacturer warranty on some of the major components, and that's in the range of 12 to 15 years we're usually seeing now for modules, inverters, which I guess we would sort of summarize as the 2 main components. The second part of the warranty, which is critical to when you're trying to put together predictive, accurate, representative economic models, is the performance guarantees that they put together on the modules. So what you'll see there is you'll see 25 years typically as a performance warranty. So what does that mean? So what the manufacturer might say is something to the effect of, this 400 watt module shall still produce 80% of nameplate value in year 25, i.e. we will give you a predictable degradation number and path that you can use to build into your modeling for the production of that module over time. And as I was saying, like the question is, well, how are these utility scale projects getting financed and such? This is a key metric or a key piece that's being used to determine the production over the lifespan of the module. And it's everything. Like we use it in everything. Now we're just doing small systems, relatively speaking. But I can tell you, when things need to be bankable, and these guys and gals, investors are putting millions of dollars into projects, millions and millions of dollars into projects, they are looking at those predictive degradation lines and they are using them to model the economics on the projects.
Great, thanks, Geoff. We have another question from Daniel. My property doesn't have any south-facing surfaces other than a wall. Have you ever installed 90-degree angled PV arrays on residential facades? And is there a benefit to having such an array during the winter or detriments in the summer?
Okay, so I guess short answer would be yes, you can definitely put modules on a vertical wall. And we have done it, commercial and residential. So that's, I guess maybe that's the first part of it. Probably the most important thing, the thing that we always try to make sure we hopefully do a reasonable job of explaining to people who are contemplating solar is, you can take the same system, exact same system, and you can put it on multiple different aspects. So the CapEx is the same, your upfront cost is the same, but it's going to produce different amounts of electricity. And even geographically, if we're in BC or we're in Saskatchewan versus Alberta, or even Edmonton versus Calgary, those systems should produce a different amount of electricity, even if they're on exactly the same aspect. So the answer to the question, I don't even think it depends. I think it's a relative benefit of putting solar in. And that's what I would hope that people in the industry are doing a lot of time, spending a lot of time trying to determine and to share valid data with their customers, with their potential customers. So, perhaps a payback, well, I don't even want to use payback. Oh, sure, payback would be X years if it's on a perfect south aspect. Well, maybe it's X plus 1 year if it's on a slightly non-south aspect. Maybe it's X plus 2 years if it's geographically in a different location. We're talking BC versus Edmonton. All of these things come into play. But I think, generally speaking, when we look at the scenarios, we see the economics are still positive in the vast majority of them. And in fact, I have seen some folks who in the industry who will talk about even a north aspect might be viable. And it's all about ensuring that you're doing the best economic modeling you can do and sharing with the customer what you believe to be the best numbers that aren't just skimmed over and put in. And I think that's a really big deal. And something certainly we focus on a ton. That helps.
Thanks, Geoff. We've got about a minute left and 3 questions. So I'm going to see if you can answer these really quickly. So the first one is, what would a typical residential 4 kilowatt rooftop system install cost in Alberta, with and without grid synchro connection supply equipment?
Well, so any grid tied system that's going to be microgen connected is going to have the ability to sync with the grid. Typical price, call it $8,000 installed for 4 kilowatts.
Thanks. Are there any environmental impacts we should be aware of? You mentioned being a cause of fires. Is this the reflection from the panels?
I didn't do a very good job of explaining that. No, what I was talking about is in California, the power lines, they don't have the time, or as stuff grows or whatever happens, you'll see a lot more of power lines being actually covered or with branches draping on them, and they're causing forest fires. The solar and the batteries are on homes that are in these geographic areas, and they're going to standalone power with solar batteries, et cetera, because the utilities are shutting the power off to the wires so they don't create fires with the branches and such laying over them.
Okay, that answers everyone's question. And finally, as you indicated, electricity is generally less than 20% of a typical household energy use. Are there consultants out there that you know of that will work to optimize the energy system for a single family home, given the availability of other energy creators such as geo exchange, solar thermal, combined heat and power?
So that was something we were doing a bit of a while ago. We've sort of gone away from that. And I think like what we've seen historically is we've seen, for example, the federal government put together an eco-energy program several years ago. And part of that initial step was an energy assessment, and there's certified energy advisors that can do that, right? Those advisors are still out there. They're still certified. They're just not probably getting as much action as they were getting previously because because we don't actually have any programs in place. So I guess what I would say there is yes, and I would suggest versus me trying to give one or two suggestions, which may not be fair or cool. I think you should be able to do a Google search and find like a certified Alberta energy advisor, and maybe talk to a couple of them. Try to understand whether or not they have a canned energy report that they're going to provide, and ensure that they're going, and maybe ask that they're going to specifically ask, or what am I trying to say? Specifically address your questions, because some of these generic assessments may be difficult to figure out. For example, as an air source heat pump, a great idea, or geo exchange, a great idea for my house. So I'd ping them on that one ahead of time when you're trying to figure out who to select. Hopefully that helps.
Great, thank you, Geoff. Thank you for your presentation and taking the time to answer questions. And finally, just to wrap up, as with every webinar that we do, when you close out of the webinar, a survey will pop up on your screen, and we at the Biosphere would really appreciate it if you could take 5 minutes out of your day just to complete the survey for us. We're going to use this information to identify how well these webinars enabled your education, and the information will be used to help us gather additional funding for these kind of programs into the future. So we'd really appreciate your interaction. At the end of the webinar, if you put in your email address, you will have the opportunity to be entered to win a portable Anchor solar charger. And next week, we're very honored to host Dr. Henriette Sang of the Athabasca University and the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada. He will be tackling the big question, how do you design buildings for climate change? It should be a really interesting one, so we hope to see you all there. As always, please don't forget to check out the online trade showcase, and I really look forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending today.
Thanks for listening. Have a great day. Be well. Thanks, Jody.
Thank you, Geoff.